I'm Rick Kaler. Thanks for joining me. A common estate planning question is whether it makes sense to leave inheritances with strings attached. My typical answer is, it depends. And no, I'm not running for political office. It's natural to want your legacy to be used wisely, but trying to control from beyond the grave can have a lot of unintended consequences. So one approach is the I won't care when I'm dead philosophy. Indeed, an inheritance is ultimately the heir's responsibility. It's not only difficult, but may even be emotionally unhealthy to try to protect heirs from themselves. Others may want an inheritance used for only certain expenses like education, a home, or to help fund retirement. If the initial recipient won't use it in that way, it can go to someone who will put it toward the purpose that the giver wants to support. Perhaps the most common reason for wanting to control a legacy is a spendthrift heir. Giving a chronic overspender an inheritance in a hope that it will help change their money behavior is almost always magical thinking. Most lump sum inheritances actually just disappear within a few years in the control of an overspender. In my experience, parents of someone with a lifetime pattern of financial chaos and crisis don't usually want to disinherit that child completely, leaving them nothing. They commonly want to protect such heirs from themselves. The goal is often to provide the heir an income, but safeguard the inheritance, the principal, in hopes of having something left for the grandchildren. Now, one way to accomplish that goal is to leave the money in a Spendthrift Trust. An independent trustee invests the money and oversees the distributions. The money in the trust is beyond the control of the heir, and, which is important, is protected from the claims of any creditors. The distribution pattern can be set up very rigidly. For example, the trust can distribute, pick a number, say 3% of the principal annually in equal monthly sums with no provisions for any other distributions. Why 3%? I pick on 3% because usually if a portfolio is invested in a moderately conservative asset allocation, 3% withdrawal rate will mean that it probably can last someone's lifetime, maybe 20, 30 years. So regardless of what percent that you settle on, using a formula like this almost assures that there'll be something to pass on to the grandchildren upon the death of the child. So in this regard, it's a win-win for everybody. The downside to a spendthrift trust is the cost. Trustee fees often start around $5,000 a year and go up from there. My rule of thumb, which is not a one-size-fits-all, is that the trustee fee needs to be 1% or less of the principal. So a fee of $5,000 really only makes sense if the inheritance, that is the portion being left to the trust, is $500,000 or more. Well, what if you want to leave $100,000 to a spendthrift heir? Paying $5,000 a year in trustee fees is going to burn that money up exponentially fast. I would suggest that you consider leaving the money in the form of a single premium immediate annuity, also called an SPIA. In return for a one-time cash investment paid for by the estate, which in this case would be $100,000, this would provide a guaranteed income for a given term. Now, that term could be, you could guarantee it would be like at least 10 years or 15 years, which would be called a 10-year certain, a 15-year certain. Oftentimes, the pure form of that is that the income is guaranteed for the life of the person. So in 5 years, that wouldn't have turned out to be such a great investment, but if they lived 40 years, it'd been phenomenal. So that's the beauty of the single premium immediate annuity. Let me give you an example. For a one-time premium of $120,000, one company will provide a 65-year-old woman with an annual lifetime income of $8,040. An SPIA locks in that income for life, and it's not subject to market fluctuation, creditors, or raids on the capital by the beneficiary. They can be excellent vehicles to protect someone who's a chronic overspender or who has a limited income, few assets, and little financial knowledge. Now, another big drawback to this, and you may have already thought about this, is that the SPIA is not going to pay any death benefits to grandchildren. However, that's in its purest form. An option you can select is a life with cash refund, where the insurance company pays the annuitant's heirs any remainder of the initial deposit that was not paid out during the annuitant's lifetime. So, for example, in the case that they did die in 5 years, let's give this example where you had $8,000 a year being paid out for $120,000. 8 times 5 is 40. That means there'd be $80,000 left to pay out to the heirs. So that's an option to check into. What's the downside? Well, the downside is actually you're going to get a little bit less for that option than you would if you didn't have the option. Beyond using either a trust or an SPIA, I generally would advise against trying to over-control an inheritance. Ultimately, it's up to your heirs to choose how to use the legacy that you give them. Thanks for listening.